There's a quiet kind of pain that doesn't look like failure on the outside. You're still showing up, you're still pushing, you're still doing the right things. But inside, something feels off, like you're forcing life to move, and life keeps resisting you. The more you push, the heavier it gets. The more you try to control the outcome, the more tired you become. And at some point, a question starts whispering underneath everything. What if this isn't discipline? What if this is fear wearing the mask of discipline? Carl Jung had a way of looking at moments like this that feels almost relieving. He didn't see the psyche as a machine you can bully into performance. He saw it as something alive, like a deeper intelligence inside you that pushes back when you're living out of alignment. And that's where this episode begins, because "don't force anything" isn't a cute quote for lazy days. It's a serious spiritual and psychological principle. When you force, you often do it because you're terrified of stillness, terrified of uncertainty, terrified that if you stop pushing, everything will fall apart. But what if some things need to fall apart? What if the exhaustion you're feeling is not a sign that you're weak, but a sign that your soul is done cooperating with a life that doesn't fit anymore? In Jung's language, a lot of what we call burnout isn't just physical tiredness. It's meaning loss. It's inner rebellion. It's the unconscious saying, "I'm not giving you energy for that path anymore." And that can feel scary because we're trained to worship constant action. We treat rest like guilt. We treat not knowing like danger. We treat slowing down like losing. So we force. We push harder. We double down. We try to squeeze life into the shape we decided it should be. And then life pushes back. Sometimes it pushes back through losing motivation. Sometimes through anxiety. Sometimes through weird symptoms that don't make sense. Sometimes through a strange fog where everything feels pointless. Sometimes through the kind of collapse that humiliates the ego but frees the soul. Now, the title has "Let God Guide You," and I want to be careful with that, because different people hear that in different ways. But here's the simplest, most grounded meaning. Guidance often doesn't arrive as a booming voice or a perfect sign. Sometimes guidance is the closing of doors you keep trying to pry open. Sometimes it's the inner peace you feel when you finally stop trying to control what was never meant for you. Sometimes it's a quiet sense of "not this," long before you discover what this actually is. Jung talked about the danger of living only from the ego, only from the part of you that wants status, certainty, control, and approval. The ego wants a straight line. The deeper self moves in curves. And when you respect that deeper movement, life starts to feel less like a war and more like a conversation. Not an easy conversation, a real one. So in this episode, we're going to walk through 12 ideas that connect in one flow, why constant action can be an illusion, why forcing is often fear, what it means when your inner energy withdraws, how symptoms can be messages, why burnout can be guidance, why collapse can be necessary, how expired structures fall away, how synchronicity can function like a compass, why timing matters more than intensity, and why peace, real peace, is often the final proof that you're back in alignment. And if you're listening right now and you feel like you've been pushing a boulder uphill for too long, I want you to hear this clearly. You're not crazy for feeling tired. You're not weak for feeling stuck. You might simply be at the edge of a transition where forcing will only break you, but listening could rebuild you. A small cue for today, just for your own mind. Pick one thing you've been forcing lately and ask, quietly, without drama, what would it look like to stop pushing and start paying attention? What? The illusion of constant action. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to confuse movement with meaning? You wake up, you grab your phone, you answer something, you check something, you fix something, you run somewhere, you keep the day alive. And, from the outside, it looks like discipline. But inside, it can feel strangely empty, like you're running a treadmill with the speed turned up, sweating hard, and still staying in the same place. That's not a small problem. That's one of the most common modern forms of spiritual exhaustion. Jung would say, the ego loves constant action because action creates the sensation of control. It's not even always arrogance. Sometimes it's fear. The ego is terrified of stillness because stillness removes the noise. And when the noise is gone, you can finally hear the deeper questions. Questions like, why am I doing this? Who am I trying to impress? What am I avoiding? What if I'm building a life that doesn't actually fit my soul? And those questions can feel dangerous because they don't come with immediate answers. So instead, we move, we stay busy, we keep the calendar full, we respond quickly, we add tasks, we create urgency, we tell ourselves we're just grinding. But sometimes the grind is not progress. Sometimes the grind is avoidance with good branding. There's a specific feeling that comes with this kind of constant action. You might recognize it. You do a lot, but you don't feel proud. You finish the day, but you don't feel satisfied. You keep chasing the next thing, but nothing actually lands inside you. It's like your life is loud, but your spirit is quiet. And the quiet is not peace, it's emptiness. That emptiness is important, not because it's pleasant, but because it's honest. Jung believed the psyche has its own intelligence. It isn't always kind. It doesn't always speak in clean sentences, but it's intelligent. And when you ignore it, it finds a way to be heard. Sometimes through anxiety, sometimes through a strange restlessness, sometimes through a loss of motivation, sometimes through symptoms in the body, sometimes through a collapse that feels unfair until you realize it was necessary. But before any of that, it often starts with this, the illusion of constant action. You can see it in small moments. A person sits down to do the real thing, the thing that would actually change their life, and suddenly they feel a weird resistance. Not laziness exactly, more like an invisible wall. So they prepare instead. They clean. They organize, they watch another video, they rewrite the plan, they optimize the workspace, they do anything that feels productive as long as it avoids the one action that would expose them. Expose them to what? To uncertainty, to vulnerability, to the possibility of failing, to the possibility of succeeding and then realizing the success wasn't the solution, to the possibility that they've been chasing something that doesn't match who they really are. Constant action is often a way to avoid those truths, and the modern world rewards it. People praise busy, they praise hustle, they praise speed, they praise being switched on. If you're always moving, you're seen as driven. If you're always available, you're seen as important. But Jung would ask something more quiet and more serious. What is the quality of your action? Is it clean or is it frantic? Clean action has a certain taste. Even when it's difficult, it feels aligned. You can feel the effort and still feel peace underneath. It's like walking uphill with a heavy bag, but you know you're going towards something that matters, something true. The struggle feels honest. Frantic action feels different. It's restless. It's tight in the chest. It's filled with micro-urgency. It's fueled by a fear that if you stop, you'll fall behind. You'll be forgotten. You'll lose control. It's like you're running not toward your purpose, but away from your feelings. And here's the part that can be hard to admit. Sometimes we choose frantic action because it makes us feel morally safe. It's easier to say, I'm working hard, than to say, I'm confused. It's easier to hide behind productivity than to face the truth that you might not know what you want anymore, or that the thing you want might require a different version of you, one who can tolerate being unseen for a while. So what does "don't force anything" mean in this context? It doesn't mean stop acting. It means stop using action as anesthesia. It means stop forcing yourself to stay busy just to avoid the discomfort of stillness. Because stillness is where direction returns. When you stop forcing, you begin noticing things you were too busy to notice. You notice what drains you. You notice what gives you life. You notice which goals feel dead and which ones still have heat. You notice which relationships feel like performance and which ones feel like home. You notice the difference between ambition and anxiety. Jung believed that when you live only from the ego, only from the part of you that wants control, life eventually pushes you into a confrontation with the deeper self. And that confrontation often begins as irritation, fatigue, or an inner sense that something is wrong even when everything looks fine. That's why the illusion of constant action is not a productivity problem, it's an alignment problem. So here's a grounded practice you can actually use today without making it dramatic. For the next 24 hours, watch your impulse to fill the space. Notice the moment your mind wants to grab the phone, open another tab, start another task, create another urgency, and in that moment, ask one quiet question. What feeling am I trying to avoid right now? Don't judge the answer, just notice it. If the feeling is fear, you've learned something. If the feeling is emptiness, you've learned something. If the feeling is uncertainty, you've learned something. Then do the simplest, most powerful thing. Take one slow breath and choose the next action from clarity, not from panic. Sometimes the next action is work. Sometimes it's rest. Sometimes it's one honest conversation. Sometimes it's admitting you need a different path. The point is, you stop moving just to move. Because your life doesn't change when you do more. It changes when what you do finally becomes true. 2. Forcing as fear, not strength. Let's get even more honest now because this is where the mask comes off. When you force something, it often feels like strength. It feels like discipline. It feels like you're being serious. You push through. You grind. You tighten your jaw. You tell yourself, no excuses. And sometimes that is exactly what you need. But Jung would ask a question that can change the entire meaning of your effort. What emotion is driving the forcing? Because forcing can come from courage, but a lot of forcing comes from fear. Fear of losing control, fear of being left behind, fear that if you slow down, your life will collapse, fear that if you don't keep pushing, you'll have to face the truth. Maybe this path doesn't fit you anymore. Maybe you don't actually want what you said you wanted. Maybe you've been building your identity around something that no longer gives you life. So you force, and you call it strength. But here's how you can tell the difference. Strength has a grounded quality. Even when it's intense, it feels clean. It feels like you're choosing something, not being chased by something. Real strength can breathe. It can pause. It can adapt. It doesn't panic in silence. Forcing feels tight. It feels like your nervous system is locked in fight mode. Your chest is tense. Your mind is rushing. Your patience gets thinner. You start snapping at small things. You start needing the outcome to happen fast, because the outcome is what's calming your fear. And once you see that, you realize forcing isn't always discipline. Sometimes forcing is desperation with a hard face. Jung talked about the ego as a control center. The ego wants certainty. The ego wants a predictable story. If I do X, I get Y. And when life refuses to cooperate with that story, the ego doesn't usually become humble right away. It becomes louder. It doubles down. It starts pushing harder. It tries to bend reality with effort. But reality doesn't bend like that. So what happens? You keep investing energy, and the returns start shrinking. You work harder, but feel less alive. You try more, but feel less confident. You push and push and push, and your inner world starts rebelling. That rebellion can show up as procrastination, anxiety, irritation, insomnia, brain fog, or a deep sense of, I can't do this anymore. And when it hits, it can feel like you're failing. But what if you're not failing? What if the forcing is the problem? There's a really human scene that captures this. Imagine someone trying to make a relationship work that's already expired. They keep talking, they keep explaining, they keep fixing. They keep trying to force closeness that isn't naturally there anymore. And what happens? The more they force it, the more anxious they become, the more needy they become, the more tense the relationship becomes, the more it slips away. Not because they didn't try hard enough, because the forcing was coming from fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of facing the grief. Jung would say that fear creates compulsion. Compulsion looks like effort, but it's actually a loss of freedom. You're not choosing, you're being driven. And this isn't just about relationships, it's about careers, goals, identities, even self-improvement. Some men force success because they're scared of being ordinary. Some force productivity because they're scared of feeling empty. Some force discipline because they're scared of their own emotions. Some force control because they're scared of surrender. And again, I'm not saying you should become passive. I'm saying you should become honest. Because honesty is what makes effort intelligent. So here's the practical shift. Instead of asking, how do I push harder? Ask, what am I afraid will happen if I stop pushing? That question is like turning on a light in a dark room. The answer might be painful, but it's clarifying, and clarity is what prevents you from building your life on fear. Now, how do you know when effort is healthy and when it's forcing? Healthy effort feels like you can keep your dignity. Even if the outcome is uncertain, you still feel steady. You can do the work and then sleep. You can fail without spiraling. You can adjust without shame. Your identity isn't hanging on the result. Forcing feels like the result is oxygen. You need it to breathe. You need it to feel okay. You need it to prove something, and that need turns the whole process into inner violence. You become harsh with yourself. You become impatient with timing. You start treating life like a machine that owes you a reward for your effort. But life doesn't owe you that. So what's the alternative? The alternative is alignment. And alignment has a different rhythm. It doesn't always feel easy, but it feels right. It feels like you're moving with your deeper self instead of dragging your deeper self behind you. Jung believed that when you are aligned, energy flows. When you are not, the psyche resists. And sometimes the resistance is not your enemy, it's guidance. So today, do one small thing. Notice where you've been forcing. Notice the area of your life where you feel tight, rushed, desperate, overly attached to the outcome. Then ask the quiet, brave question. Is this coming from love or from fear? If it's love, continue with patience. If it's fear, slow down without shame. Because when you stop forcing from fear, you don't become weaker, you become free. And here's the question to sit with before we move on. What are you currently forcing in your life? And what fear is underneath that forcing, asking to be seen? 3. When the soul withdraws its energy. There's a moment in life that can feel confusing, even humiliating, especially if you've built your identity around being driven. You wake up, and the engine isn't there. The same goals that used to light you up now feel heavy. The same routines that used to feel meaningful now feel like you're dragging yourself through wet cement. And you start panicking because you think something is wrong with you. But Jung would say, sometimes the problem isn't you. Sometimes the psyche is withdrawing energy on purpose. In Jung's language, your energy isn't just motivation. It's libido, not only sexual energy, but life energy, the fuel your psyche gives to certain directions, certain relationships, certain dreams. And that fuel is not infinite. It has intelligence. It doesn't always follow your ego's plans. It flows toward what is alive in you, and it retreats from what is dead. So when the soul withdraws its energy, it's not always depression. Sometimes it's guidance. It's the deeper self saying, I'm not funding that life anymore. That sounds intense, but you've probably experienced a small version of it. Maybe you've stayed in a job that looks good on paper, but every morning you feel a silent dread. Maybe you've kept chasing a goal because it's what you said you wanted years ago, but now you feel numb toward it. Maybe you've been trying to force a relationship to work, and you can feel your inner life closing down. You can still perform. You can still show up. But the warmth is gone. That's withdrawal. And it can be terrifying because the ego interprets it as failure. The ego says, you're lazy. You're losing your edge. You're falling behind. The ego wants to whip you back into motion. But Jung would say, don't rush to punish yourself. First, listen. Because this could be a message. The psyche doesn't speak in logical memos. It speaks through energy. If something is aligned, there's usually a sense of inner yes, even if it's hard. If something is misaligned, there's often resistance, fatigue, confusion, and a sense of inner deadness. Not because you're weak, because you're being redirected. This is where let God guide you becomes very real in a grounded way. Guidance often looks like a door closing inside you. You can still push it open from the outside, but you can feel the inner part of you refusing to cooperate. And the mistake people make is they treat that refusal like an enemy. They try to fix it with more caffeine, more pressure, more shame, more motivational content, more self-attack. They try to hack their way back into energy. Sometimes that works short-term, but long-term, it creates a deeper split. The ego forcing, the soul withdrawing. Then you get that strange feeling of living two lives. The outer life is busy, the inner life is absent. Jung believed that when you ignore the deeper self, the psyche will eventually create a symptom, not to punish you, but to force attention inward. Because if your energy is gone, you will finally stop. You will finally question. You will finally confront what you've been avoiding. And that confrontation is often the beginning of transformation. So, how do you know if this is just tiredness or something deeper? Start with honesty. Ask, am I physically depleted or spiritually depleted? Physical depletion needs rest, food, sleep, movement, sunlight, basic care. Spiritual depletion often has a different signature. You can sleep and still feel empty. You can rest and still feel like something is missing. You can take a vacation and still feel no joy. That's usually a sign that the issue isn't your schedule, it's your direction. And when direction is wrong, energy becomes expensive. There's a very human way this shows up. You'll notice you can still get energy for some things. You can talk for hours about something that feels alive. You can stay up late reading about a topic that excites you. You can suddenly find energy to help someone you love. So your energy isn't gone, it's just not available for what's misaligned. That's the soul withdrawing funding. Now, none of this means you instantly quit your job or blow up your life. Jung wasn't telling people to act impulsively. He was telling people to pay attention to the psyche's signals and take them seriously. Because if you don't, the withdrawal often becomes more dramatic. The psyche escalates. So the practice here is not stop everything, it's stop lying to yourself. Today, instead of attacking yourself for feeling unmotivated, do something more mature. Ask, what is my energy refusing to serve right now? And why? Is it refusing to serve a path you've outgrown? Is it refusing to serve a role you're performing for other people? Is it refusing to serve a version of success that doesn't match your values anymore? If you get quiet enough, you'll usually feel the answer, not as a perfect sentence, but as a sense, a heaviness, a clarity, an inner no. And the moment you respect that no, something interesting happens. You stop fighting yourself. You stop making your inner world your enemy. And when you stop fighting yourself, your energy begins to return. Not immediately, but gradually, like a tide coming back. Because the soul doesn't give energy to what is false for long, but it will give energy to what is true. Here's the question to hold before we go to point 4. Where in your life do you feel your inner energy withdrawing? And what truth might it be trying to protect you from ignoring? 4. Loss of motivation as guidance. Most people treat loss of motivation like a personal defect, like something is wrong with their character. They start speaking to themselves in a harsh, almost violent way. Get it together. Stop being lazy. Push harder. And sometimes that tough talk can get you moving for a day or two. But Jung would ask you to slow down and consider something deeper. What if the loss of motivation is not the enemy? What if it's a signal? Because motivation isn't just a mood, it's energy with direction. And direction is the part we forget to question. When motivation disappears, we usually assume the solution is to get it back. But Jung's view of the psyche suggests another possibility. Maybe the psyche is withdrawing motivation because continuing on this exact path is no longer healthy. Maybe your deeper self is done cooperating with a life that is built on fear, performance, or outdated goals. In other words, loss of motivation can be guidance. Not always. Sometimes you're just tired. Sometimes your body needs sleep and you're trying to solve it with psychology. Sometimes you're undernourished, overstimulated, or living in constant stress. That's real. But the kind of motivation loss we're talking about here has a specific texture. It's not, I'm tired. It's, I don't care. It's not, I need rest. It's, this feels meaningless. And that's a different kind of message. Jung believed that the psyche moves toward wholeness. That's the deeper goal. Not your ego's version of success, but your soul's version of integrity. So when you keep forcing yourself to chase something that fragments you, something that makes you betray your values, ignore your body, suppress your truth, the psyche eventually responds by pulling the plug on the energy. It's like an internal circuit breaker. Because if you had unlimited motivation, you might keep running in the wrong direction for years. You might build a beautiful prison and call it a dream. So the psyche removes the fuel, not to destroy you, but to stop you. And stopping you is often the beginning of saving you. Here's a simple way to see the difference between healthy discipline and unhealthy forcing. Discipline can survive without motivation, but it doesn't hate you in the process. Unhealthy forcing uses discipline like a weapon against yourself. It turns every low-energy day into a moral failure. It makes you feel like you're constantly behind. And that inner violence drains you even more. Jung would say, don't insult the symptom. Listen to it. Because symptoms are not random. They're often communication. So if your motivation is gone, ask what it's pointing to. Sometimes it's pointing to a goal that is no longer yours. You picked it to impress people. You picked it to prove something. You picked it because it looked powerful, and maybe it did serve you for a season. But seasons end. And when a season ends, the soul withdraws enthusiasm because it's time to move. Sometimes motivation disappears because you're living out of alignment with your values. You might be doing successful things, but you don't respect the way you're doing them. You're cutting corners. You're tolerating things you shouldn't. You're saying yes when you mean no. You're living on autopilot, and the soul refuses to feel excited about a life that doesn't feel honest. Sometimes motivation disappears because you're carrying too much that isn't yours. Other people's expectations, other people's timelines, other people's pressure. You're trying to be the hero for everyone, and you're neglecting the quiet inner life that actually sustains you. Motivation disappears because your inner self is starving. And sometimes motivation disappears because you're meant to slow down and integrate. Jung believed growth isn't only forward motion. Sometimes growth is digestion. You experience something, learned something, changed internally, and now you need time to absorb it. But if you keep forcing forward motion, you never integrate. You become a man who is always moving, but never evolving. So what do you do with loss of motivation? You don't panic. You don't label yourself. You don't make it a story about your identity. You treat it like a message. Here's a grounded practice you can use today. When you notice motivation is missing, don't ask, how do I feel motivated again? Ask a cleaner question. What is the smallest true action I can do today that aligns with who I want to be? Not the biggest action, not the most dramatic, the smallest true one. Because if your motivation is gone, you don't need a motivational speech. You need alignment. One honest action is like turning a compass north again. It tells your psyche, I'm listening. And when the psyche feels listened to, energy often returns. But there's another possibility, and it's important. Maybe the right action today is to stop pushing. Maybe the right action is to rest without guilt, to sit in silence, to let the nervous system unwind, to let your inner world speak. Because sometimes motivation disappears because you've been sprinting for too long and calling it life. And if that's you, then loss of motivation is not a failure. It's guidance toward balance. So the invitation in this point is simple. Stop treating your lack of motivation as an insult and start treating it as information. Here's the question to hold before we move on. If your loss of motivation is trying to guide you, what is it asking you to stop forcing, and what is it asking you to return to? 5. Symptoms as messages from the unconscious. There's a part of you that speaks in words, and there's a part of you that speaks in signals. Most of us were trained to only respect the first one. If you can explain it, it's real. If you can measure it, it matters. If you can prove it, it counts. But Jung lived in a different neighborhood of truth. He watched people who could explain their lives perfectly and still feel miserable in their bodies. People who could logically justify every choice and still wake up with dread. People who looked functional, even impressive. And yet their sleep was wrecked. Their chest was tight. Their stomach was always off. Their mind couldn't settle. Their energy kept collapsing at the worst times. Jung would say, don't rush to silence that. Don't rush to label it as random. The unconscious speaks through symptoms, and I know that word, symptoms, can instantly make this sound medical, and I'm not trying to give medical advice here. I'm talking about the psychological and spiritual layer that often rides underneath. The layer we ignore until our life forces us to listen. The inner language that shows up as tension, restlessness, numbness, irritability, a constant urge to escape, a strange anxiety that has no clear source, a heaviness in the morning, a fog that settles over your mind when you try to take a certain step. If you've ever had your body say no while your ego kept yelling yes, you know what I mean. The ego loves clean stories. I'm fine. I'm just tired. I just need to push through. It wants to keep the plan intact, keep the image intact, keep the identity intact. The unconscious doesn't care about your image. It cares about your wholeness. And if you're living in a way that splits you, doing things you don't believe in, forcing yourself into a role that doesn't fit, swallowing truths you're afraid to face, then the unconscious starts tapping on the wall. Softly at first, then louder. Not to punish you, but to restore balance. That's why symptoms can be guidance. They can be the soul's way of saying, pay attention, something is not aligned. Think about how often people treat discomfort like an enemy to defeat. They'll numb it, distract from it, drown it in work, scroll it away, drink it away, replace it with noise. And sometimes you can get away with that for a while. But the unconscious is patient. It keeps sending messages because it's trying to protect something deeper than your current comfort. Jung had a simple respect for this inner intelligence. He didn't treat every symptom as a monster. He treated it like a symbol, like a clue, like a letter from a part of you that you've been ignoring. So let's bring it into real life. Imagine someone who keeps getting mysteriously exhausted every time they're about to take a step forward. They get tired when they're about to launch something, apply for something, speak up, commit. And on the surface it looks like laziness, but underneath it might be fear. Fear of visibility, fear of judgment, fear of success even. The unconscious is saying, you're about to step into a larger life, but you haven't made peace with being seen. Or imagine someone who feels anxiety every time they walk into their workplace, not because the job is physically hard, but because the environment is psychologically wrong for them. Their values are constantly compromised. They feel they have to perform a personality. They feel they can't breathe. Their body begins reacting before their mind can rationalize it. That anxiety might not be a flaw. It might be an internal alarm. This is not a place where you can stay whole. Or imagine someone who keeps getting pulled into impulsive habits at night, food, scrolling, anything to numb, and they hate themselves for it. Jung would say, don't start with self-hate. Start with curiosity. What feeling are you trying not to feel when the day goes quiet? What truth shows up when there's no more performance left? The symptom is not the whole story, but it's pointing at the story. And this is where let God guide you becomes very grounded again. Because guidance doesn't always arrive as comfort. Sometimes guidance arrives as friction. The path that isn't yours starts to feel heavy. The role that isn't you starts to drain your life force. The lie you keep living starts to make your body restless. The signal isn't there to scare you. It's there to redirect you back to truth. Here's the mistake people make. They treat the symptom as the problem, instead of asking what problem the symptom is trying to solve. They say, how do I stop feeling this? Before they ever ask, why am I feeling this? So let's turn this into a simple human practice. The next time a symptom shows up, tension, dread, agitation, numbness, try this. Don't immediately reach for the fix. First, give it 10 seconds of respect. Put a hand on your chest if you want, or just slow your breathing slightly and ask, if this feeling could speak, what would it be trying to tell me? Then ask one more question. What am I doing in my life right now that requires me to silence myself to keep going? You might not get an answer in perfect words. Sometimes you only get a direction, a sense, a quiet, not this. That's enough. That's information you can work with. And again, you don't have to blow up your life overnight. Jung wasn't telling people to react impulsively to every emotion. He was saying, stop treating your inner world like it's irrelevant. The unconscious will keep sending messages until you respond with honesty. When you finally listen, the symptom often softens, not because life becomes easy, but because the inner war ends. So here's the question to hold before we move on. What symptom keeps showing up in your life lately? And if it's a message, what truth have you been trying not to hear? 6. Burnout as a signal, not a failure. Burnout is one of the most misunderstood experiences of modern life, because people talk about it like it's just tiredness, like you worked hard, so now you need a weekend off, and then you'll be fine. But if you've ever been truly burned out, you know it's not that simple. It's not just low energy. It's a deeper kind of shutdown. It's waking up and feeling like you have nothing left to give. Not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. It's the sense that even small tasks feel heavy. Even things you used to enjoy feel flat. Your patience gets thin. Your sleep gets weird. Your mind feels foggy. You start feeling guilty for not being who you used to be, and that guilt makes it worse. Jung would look at burnout and say, don't call it a failure too quickly. Burnout is often a signal that you've been living in a way that isn't sustainable. A signal that you've been pushing the ego's plan past the soul's capacity. A signal that you've been spending life energy without replenishing meaning. A signal that something in you is refusing to keep cooperating with a life built on constant forcing. So the first upgrade in this point is psychological. Stop shaming yourself for burning out. Shame is like pouring gasoline on the fire. It doesn't restore you, it just adds another layer of suffering. Not only am I exhausted, but I'm weak for being exhausted. Jung would say that kind of inner cruelty is exactly what deepens the split inside you. Instead, treat burnout like information. Because the psyche is not stupid, it doesn't shut down randomly. Often burnout is the psyche's emergency brake. You might be the kind of person who would never stop on your own. You would keep pushing through stress, through pain, through emotional numbness, through unhealthy routines, through relationships that drain you, through work that doesn't fit. So the psyche stops you. It forces a pause you would never choose voluntarily. Not to destroy your life, to save your life. There's a line Jung is often associated with in spirit, even when people paraphrase it in different ways. What you resist doesn't disappear. It returns in another form. Burnout is often the return. It's the bill you didn't want to pay, arriving with interest. You resisted rest, so your body demands it. You resisted emotional truth, so your mind collapses into fog. You resisted boundaries, so your nervous system becomes irritable and raw. You resisted meaning, so everything feels pointless. Burnout is not just too much work, it's often too much of the wrong work, done for too long, with too little inner honesty. And this is where the God guidance part becomes real again. Sometimes God guides you by closing doors externally, but sometimes guidance happens internally. Your capacity shrinks on purpose, so you stop feeding what isn't meant for you. The energy disappears, so you can't keep forcing. The body becomes the teacher when the mind refuses to listen. Now, let's make this practical in a way that doesn't become dramatic or mystical. Ask yourself, what have I been doing that requires me to abandon myself to keep it going? That question can be uncomfortable because the answer might be, I've been trying to prove myself to someone who will never be satisfied. Or, I've been living in a job that drains my values. Or, I've been saying yes to everything because I'm scared of being disliked. Or, I've been chasing a version of success I don't even want anymore. Or, I've been pretending I'm okay when I'm not. Burnout is often the consequence of self-abandonment, and Jung would say the psyche always seeks wholeness. If your life is built on a split, one version of you performing, another version of you suffering, burnout is the psyche trying to reunite you. It's saying you can't keep living two lives. So what do you do when you realize burnout might be a signal? You don't just rest for a weekend and return to the same pattern. That's like putting a bandage on a broken bone and calling it healed. You have to interpret the signal. You have to ask what needs to change in the structure of your life, not just the intensity. And sometimes the change is simple and humbling. It's not quitting everything. It's setting boundaries. It's sleeping properly. It's reducing stimulation. It's removing one draining obligation. It's saying no to one thing that you've been tolerating. It's returning to one practice that restores you. Walking, prayer, journaling, silence, reading, time in nature, time with people who don't require you to perform. Burnout often begins healing when you stop treating yourself like a machine. And the other part, maybe the deeper part, is that burnout can be a call to meaning, because you can endure a lot when the why is real. But when the why is fake, when it's ego, fear, comparison, proving, your psyche eventually refuses. It says, I won't suffer for a lie. So if you're burned out, you're not broken. You might be waking up. You might be receiving a brutal kind of grace. The grace of being stopped before your life becomes a habit you can't escape. Here's a simple practice for today. Instead of asking, how do I get my energy back? Ask, what would my life look like if it didn't require me to betray myself to succeed? Then pick one small change that moves you in that direction. 1. Small. Honest. Because burnout is not always a sign you're weak. Sometimes it's a sign you've been strong in the wrong direction. Here's the question to hold before we move on. If your burnout is a signal, what is it trying to end, and what is it trying to protect? 7. The necessary collapse. There are moments in life when it feels like everything is falling apart, and the truth is, it is. But Jung would say something that can sound shocking until you've lived it. Sometimes the collapse is necessary. Sometimes it's not a tragedy, it's a correction. Because if you build your life on a false structure, an identity that isn't really you, a relationship held together by fear, a career chosen for approval, a personality built to survive rather than to live, then eventually that structure starts cracking, and the ego panics. The ego calls it failure. The ego tries to patch it quickly so nobody notices. But the soul doesn't always want patches. Sometimes it wants truth. Jung believed that transformation often requires a breakdown of the old form. Not because the psyche is cruel, but because the psyche is honest. It will not support a lie forever. If you keep refusing to change voluntarily, life will eventually change you through collapse. It will remove the old supports. It will shake the foundation. It will force a confrontation. This is why people often hit rock bottom right before they wake up. It's not romantic, it's not pretty, but it's real. A man loses a job, a relationship ends, a health scare arrives, a panic attack hits, a depression settles in. Something snaps, and suddenly the old way of living is no longer possible. That moment feels like punishment if you're only looking through the ego. But if you look through Jung's lens, that moment can be initiation. An initiation into a deeper life. Because the collapse exposes what was hidden. It reveals what you were using to avoid yourself. It reveals the addiction to control. It reveals the dependence on external validation. It reveals the way you were running from pain instead of healing it. It reveals the role you were playing. And the reason collapse is so painful is because it strips away the distractions. It leaves you face to face with yourself. In Jung's work, a lot of this is connected to the concept of individuation, the process of becoming whole, not becoming perfect, becoming integrated, becoming the full version of yourself, including the parts you avoided, the shadow, the grief, the truth, the real desires, the real boundaries, the real values, the real calling. And here's the thing. Individuation doesn't happen when life is comfortable. Comfort allows you to keep pretending. Collapse removes the option of pretending. That's why this point matters so much for the theme of the episode. Don't force anything, because forcing is often an attempt to prevent collapse. You force the relationship, you force the career, you force the image, you force the hustle, you force the personality, you force the life you think you're supposed to have, because you're terrified of what happens if it falls apart. But what if the thing you're forcing is exactly what needs to fall? There's a strange mercy in collapse. It ends the exhausting performance. It ends the denial. It ends the slow self-betrayal. It takes away the false choices and leaves you with the real choice. Will you rebuild honestly? Or will you rebuild the same lie with a new paint job? Now, to keep this grounded, let's talk about what collapse can look like in normal life. It doesn't always mean losing everything. Sometimes collapse is internal. You lose the ability to fake motivation. You lose the ability to tolerate certain environments. You lose the ability to laugh at jokes that violate your values. You lose the ability to shrink yourself. You lose the ability to keep running. Something in you says, no more. And that no more can feel scary, but it can also be the beginning of a clean life. Because the psyche collapses what is not true, so that what is true can finally emerge. Jung would also say that the unconscious is compensatory, meaning when your conscious life becomes too one-sided, too controlling, too performative, too rational, too disconnected, the unconscious pushes back to restore balance. Collapse is sometimes the psyche restoring balance in the most dramatic way possible. So what do you do when you're in a necessary collapse? First, you stop calling it the end. That's the ego's favorite story. I'm finished. It's over. I ruined everything. Those thoughts are understandable, but they're usually wrong. Collapse is not always the end. It's often the end of a chapter. Second, you stop forcing the old structure to return. This is hard because the old structure is familiar. Even if it was painful, it was known. The new life is unknown, and unknown feels like danger. But forcing the old structure to return is like dragging a dead thing back into your house and asking it to be alive again. Third, you start listening for what the collapse is making room for. Not in a magical way, in an honest way. What truth has been revealed? What values are now clear? What boundaries are now non-negotiable? What part of you is finally asking to be lived? And this is where the God guidance theme becomes emotionally real. Sometimes guidance is not comfort. Sometimes guidance is demolition, because you can't build a new life on an old foundation that's cracked. Something has to come down first. So here's a simple practice you can do if you're in a collapse season right now. Take one sheet of paper or open a note and write one sentence. The part of my life that is collapsing is. Then write the next sentence. The truth it is forcing me to face is. Don't write a paragraph, just a sentence. Clean, honest. That's enough to start turning collapse into direction. Here's the question to hold before we move on. If this collapse is necessary, what is it trying to free you from, and what is it trying to lead you toward? 8. Letting expired structures fall away. There's a specific kind of suffering that doesn't come from pain itself. It comes from clinging. You can feel it when something is clearly ending, but you keep holding it together with effort, with explanation, with hope, with denial. You keep trying to make the old structure work, an old routine, an old relationship dynamic, an old identity, an old version of success, even though deep down you already know it's expired. Jung would say this is one of the most exhausting forms of inner conflict, when the conscious mind is still trying to maintain what the unconscious has already outgrown. That's what an expired structure is. It's a form that once served you, once protected you, once gave you meaning, but now it's too small for who you're becoming. And the tragedy is, you can keep living inside it for a long time. But the longer you stay, the more life starts to feel tight. The more you feel drained. The more you feel restless. The more you feel like you're suffocating in a life that looks fine to everyone else. Because externally, expired structures can still look successful. They can still get applause, they can still get attention, they can still pay the bills, they can still look stable. But inside, the soul has moved on. And when the soul moves on, it stops giving energy. So you start forcing, you start trying to revive something that is no longer alive. This is where the idea, don't force anything, let God guide you, becomes deeply practical. Sometimes guidance is not God giving you something new immediately. Sometimes guidance is God removing what you're clinging to so you can finally become available for what's next. But we don't like that. We like upgrades without endings. We like growth without grief. We like new chapters without closing the old book. And that's why we suffer. We keep trying to drag an expired structure into the future. Jung would say, transformation requires sacrifice. Not sacrifice in a dramatic religious sense. Sacrifice in a psychological sense. You have to give up what no longer belongs to you. You have to let an old identity die so a more honest one can be born. And that death can feel like losing yourself until you realize you were losing a mask. Let's make this feel real. A man might cling to being the strong one who never needs help, because that identity once protected him. It helped him survive. It earned him respect. But now it's costing him intimacy, peace, and authenticity. That identity becomes an expired structure, and life begins pressuring him to let it go, through loneliness, through anxiety, through emotional exhaustion. Not to punish him, to evolve him. Or a man clings to a relationship structure where he is always overgiving, always over-explaining, always trying to earn love. Maybe that once felt like loyalty, but now it's self-abandonment. The structure is expired. His soul is asking for boundaries and dignity. If he refuses, the relationship eventually collapses or becomes painful enough that he has to change. Or a man clings to a career identity that gave him status, but his inner life feels dead. He keeps telling himself to be grateful, to push through, to man up, but the energy keeps withdrawing. He starts getting symptoms. He starts dreading Monday. He starts feeling numb. That's his psyche saying the structure is expired. And here's the most important detail: an expired structure doesn't mean it was wrong. It just means it's done. It served its season. It carried you through something, and now it's time to release it with respect, not with shame. This is why letting things fall away is not failure, it's maturity. Because mature men don't cling to what's dead. They grieve it, they learn from it, and they move. Jung believed that what you cling to becomes a prison. You might feel safe inside it because it's familiar, but it limits your growth. And the unconscious will always push toward freedom, even if it has to create discomfort to do it. So, if you're in a season where structures are falling away, if you're losing interest, losing attachments, losing old habits, losing certain relationships, losing certain dreams, don't panic too quickly. Ask, what is being removed to make room for something more aligned? Now, I want to give you a simple practice here, something that keeps you from forcing what's expired back into your life. When you feel yourself clinging, ask 2 questions. First, what is the structure I'm trying to hold together? Second, what part of me is afraid of letting it go? Because clinging is usually fear. Fear of uncertainty, fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of losing your identity, fear that you won't find something better. And that fear is understandable, but it's not a reason to live in an expired life. When you let expired structures fall away, you feel grief at first. That's normal. But then something else starts happening. Your energy returns. Your breath gets deeper. Your mind gets clearer. Your body relaxes. Because the inner war ends. You're no longer spending life force propping up something that your soul already left. And this is the quiet miracle of surrender. You don't become weaker. You become lighter. You become available. Available for the right people. Available for the right work. Available for the right timing. Available for the next chapter. Here's the question to hold before we move on. What structure in your life feels expired, but you're still forcing it to stay? And what do you fear would happen if you finally let it fall away? 9. Synchronicity as direction, not coincidence. There's a certain kind of moment that almost feels like life is speaking back to you. You're thinking about making a change you've been afraid to make, and you overhear a stranger say the exact sentence you needed. You're wrestling with a decision, and the same theme keeps appearing, different places, different faces, different contexts. Like reality is gently underlining something you've been ignoring. You meet a person by accident who opens a door you weren't even looking for, and it doesn't feel random. It feels timed. Jung called this synchronicity, meaningful coincidence, not coincidence that proves magic, coincidence that carries psychological weight, a pattern that doesn't necessarily have a clear cause and effect explanation, but still has a clear effect on your inner life. It shifts you, it points you, it wakes you up. Now, here's the important part. Synchronicity is not a replacement for responsibility. It's not a sign that you should stop thinking. Jung wasn't trying to turn people into superstition addicts. He was trying to describe something many people already experience, but don't know how to interpret without either dismissing it completely or turning it into fantasy. The way to keep it grounded is this. Synchronicity often shows up when your conscious mind is stuck and your deeper self is trying to move. It's like the psyche uses the outer world as a mirror to reflect an inner truth you're close to, but not fully admitting yet. There's a famous moment Jung described from his own clinical work. A patient was very intellectual, tightly defended, almost impossible to reach emotionally. She told him a dream about a scarab, an ancient symbol of transformation. And right in that moment, Jung heard a tapping at the window. He opened it, and a beetle flew in, remarkably similar to the scarab image she had just described. That moment cracked something open in the room. Not because the beetle was a miracle, but because the psyche recognized meaning. The patient's rigid certainty loosened. Something softened. The unconscious had found a way to speak through the timing of events. That's what synchronicity does at its best. It breaks the spell of the ego. Because the ego wants to believe it's in full control. It wants straight lines, predictable plans, fixed identities. Synchronicity reminds you that reality is bigger than your plan, and that your life can be guided by something deeper than your anxiety. But here's the trap. Once people discover synchronicity, they sometimes start chasing it. They want constant signs, constant reassurance, constant confirmation. That turns guidance into addiction. Jung would warn against that, because the point isn't to become dependent on symbols. The point is to become aligned enough that you can hear your own inner truth. So how do you use synchronicity like a mature person? You treat it like a compass, not a command. A compass doesn't walk for you. It doesn't do the work for you. It simply points. It suggests a direction. And then your job is to test that direction with reality, your values, your stability, your patience, your long-term health. Synchronicity often shows up when you're ready to stop forcing. That's the theme of this whole episode. When you stop squeezing life, you start noticing life. When you stop trying to dominate the timeline, you start catching the timing. You become less noisy inside, and the world feels strangely more responsive. Not in a magical way, but in a perceptual way. Your attention becomes sharper. Your intuition becomes clearer. Your choices become less desperate. And sometimes what you call God guiding you is exactly this. You are finally aligned enough to notice what has been trying to guide you all along. So here's a simple practice to keep this clean and believable. When something feels like synchronicity, don't immediately ask, "What does it mean?" Ask, "What does it point to in me?" Does it point to a truth you've been avoiding? Does it point to a decision you've been delaying? Does it point to a pattern you need to end? Does it point to a door you're afraid to walk through? And then, instead of getting lost in interpretation, take one grounded action in that direction. One email, one boundary, one conversation, 1 hour of real work, one honest admission to yourself. Because synchronicity, if it's real guidance, should lead you into reality, not away from it. Here's the deeper payoff. When you treat synchronicity as direction, you stop forcing your life like it's a dead machine. You start cooperating with it like it's alive. You still work. You still show up. You still carry responsibility. But you stop trying to brute force outcomes that are not ready or not yours. And that's where peace starts entering your life again. Not the peace of everything is perfect. The peace of I'm moving with truth. So let me leave you with a question that matters. What pattern has life been repeating in front of you lately? And if it's pointing somewhere, what would it look like to take one calm, honest step in that direction? 10. Right timing over forced effort. There's a kind of effort that is noble, and there's a kind of effort that is just panic in motion. They can look identical from the outside. Same long hours, same intensity, same determination. But inside, they feel completely different. One is aligned, the other is desperate. And this is where Jung's worldview becomes both psychological and quietly spiritual. Timing matters. Not as an excuse to delay forever, but as a law of inner life. There are seasons when energy flows, when things open, when your psyche says yes, when your mind is clear, when your will feels clean. And there are seasons when everything resists, when doors stay closed, when you feel fog, when the inner world pulls you inward. Most people try to solve that second season with force. They treat resistance as an insult. They interpret delay as failure. They take a closed door personally. Then they push harder, louder, faster. They try to bully reality into giving them what they want. But life doesn't always respond to volume. Sometimes it responds to timing. In nature, nothing blooms because it was pressured. A tree doesn't grow because you yelled at it. If you try to pull a plant out of the ground to make it taller faster, you don't speed up growth. You kill it. And Jung would say the psyche works in a similar way. There is a natural rhythm to maturation. Certain realizations can't be rushed. Certain transformations need incubation. Certain choices only become clear after you've lived through enough experience. So, right timing over forced effort is not a motivational slogan. It's respect for the process. Now, this can trigger something in ambitious people, because the ego hears this and says, "So what? I'm supposed to do nothing." No, that's not the point. The point is to stop confusing intensity with correctness. You can work extremely hard in the wrong direction. You can push with heroic willpower and still be misaligned. And then you end up exhausted, bitter, and confused because you worked hard and got nowhere, and you start doubting life, doubting yourself, doubting God. But the issue might not be your effort, it might be your timing. Jung believed that the unconscious has a way of protecting you from premature decisions. Sometimes, when you try to force something, you meet resistance because you're not ready for the consequences of what you're asking for. Or because what you're asking for is a substitute for what you truly need. Or because you're trying to leap over a lesson that can only be learned through patience. And patience is the part people don't respect anymore. We live in an era where everything is instant. Messages, entertainment, purchases, validation. So when life asks you to wait, it feels like punishment. But waiting can be guidance. Not waiting as passive surrender, but waiting as intelligent preparation. Here's how you can feel the difference in your body. When effort is aligned with right timing, you can work hard and still feel grounded. You might be tired, but you're not drained. You might be challenged, but you're not spiritually collapsing. You feel like your actions are building something real. Even the obstacles feel meaningful, like they're shaping you. When effort is forced against timing, you feel frantic. You feel like you're chasing. You feel like you need the result now to calm your nervous system. You can't enjoy the process. You can't breathe. You keep checking for outcomes. You keep needing proof. You keep trying to control everything, and the more you push, the more fragile you become. That's a sign. Not that you should quit, but that you should slow down enough to regain clarity. So what does it mean to honor timing without becoming passive? It means you shift from forcing outcomes to preparing yourself. If a door is closed, you don't sit outside it crying forever. You build skills, you strengthen discipline, you refine your character, you clean your life, you become a better man. Because the truth is, many delays are not delays, they're preparation. And this is where the spiritual framing becomes real without being exaggerated. Sometimes God guides you by not giving you what you want yet. Because what you want might crush you if you got it too soon. Or it might distract you from what you truly need. Or it might reinforce a false identity. So the path doesn't open until you're ready to walk it without losing yourself. That's not a punishment. It's protection. Now, a grounded way to practice this in your daily life is to stop asking, "How do I force this to happen?" and start asking, "What is my part right now?" Because there is always a part. Your part might be showing up consistently, even while the outcome is uncertain. Your part might be working quietly, building competence, becoming more valuable. Your part might be healing something inside you that would sabotage the thing you want. Your part might be letting an expired structure fall away so you can receive something better. Your part might be learning patience as a form of strength. Right timing is not a lottery ticket. It's alignment meeting readiness. And you can feel readiness. Readiness doesn't mean you have no fear. It means you have clarity. It means your actions aren't coming from desperation. It means you're willing to do the work without needing guarantees. It means you can hold the outcome lightly while holding your effort firmly. So if you've been forcing something lately, a relationship, a career move, a plan, a timeline, here's your practice. Pause and ask, is this effort coming from trust or from fear? If it's fear, slow down, return to your part, strengthen your foundation, and watch how life starts responding differently, not because you did less, but because you stopped fighting the rhythm. And here's the question to hold before we move on. What are you trying to force right now that might simply be asking for timing? And what would it look like to keep working, but with trust instead of pressure? 11. Shifting from control to inner alignment. Control is a strange addiction because it starts as a survival skill and ends as a prison. At some point in your life, control probably saved you. Maybe you grew up in chaos, so you learned to manage everything. Maybe you were disappointed too many times, so you learned to rely only on yourself. Maybe you were hurt, so you learned to stay guarded, to plan, to predict, to keep your emotions in a tight cage. Control can look like strength, and in a way it is, until it becomes the only way you know how to live. Then it quietly turns into anxiety, because the more you try to control life, the more life reveals how uncontrollable it is. People change, timing shifts, plans break, emotions rise. The body has its own needs, and when you make control your religion, every unpredictable event feels like a threat. Jung would say this is one of the ego's deepest illusions, the belief that safety comes from control. But real safety, the kind that lasts, comes from inner alignment. Inner alignment means your outer life is cooperating with your inner truth. Your actions match your values. Your relationships match your dignity. Your goals match who you actually are, not who you're trying to perform as. Your schedule matches your nervous system's capacity. Your yes is real, and your no is real. You're no longer living two lives, one for the world, one for your private pain. And once you're aligned, you don't need the same level of control because you stop fighting yourself. That's the hidden cost of control. It's often a way to manage inner conflict. When you don't trust your own feelings, you try to control the external. When you don't trust life, you try to control timing. When you don't trust people, you try to control outcomes. When you don't trust God, you try to control everything. But control doesn't create trust, it replaces it. Jung believed that the psyche moves toward wholeness, so when you cling to control, you often become rigid, you become predictable, you become emotionally blocked. You stop listening, and then the unconscious pushes back. Through symptoms, through burnout, through collapse, through loss of motivation. Not because you're being punished, because the deeper self is trying to return you to alignment. So the shift from control to alignment is not a change in your external behavior first. It's a change in your relationship with yourself. It's you admitting, I've been trying to control the world because I don't feel safe inside me. And that admission is painful. But it's also the beginning of freedom. Because once you see that, you can stop treating control as strength and start treating it as a signal that you're not aligned. Here's a simple way to test this. When you're aligned, you can handle uncertainty without collapsing. You can breathe even when you don't have guarantees. You can work without obsession. You can love without clinging. You can make decisions without needing everyone to approve. You still care, but you're not desperate. When you're not aligned, you become compulsive. You need constant reassurance. You need constant progress. You need constant proof. Your mind keeps scanning for danger. You overthink conversations. You replay mistakes. You try to manage how people see you. You try to control timing. You try to control the outcome. And the more you try, the more restless you become. So alignment is not an abstract spiritual concept. It's nervous system clarity. It's your body telling you, yes, this is true. That's why peace is such a powerful signal, and we'll get to that in the final point. But even here, you can start noticing it. When you make a decision that matches your deeper self, you feel relief. Even if it's hard, even if it scares you, there's a clean feeling underneath, like you finally stopped lying. Now, how do you shift into alignment practically? You stop asking, how do I control this? And start asking, what is the truth I'm avoiding? Because misalignment is usually dishonesty, not necessarily dishonesty with other people, dishonesty with yourself. You might be avoiding the truth that you're exhausted and need to change your rhythm. You might be avoiding the truth that you're staying in something expired. You might be avoiding the truth that you want a different life than the one you've been performing. You might be avoiding the truth that your need for control is really a need for safety. And once you face the truth, you can align your actions with it. Alignment is built through small, honest actions, not huge, dramatic ones. Small ones you can repeat. It's telling the truth in one conversation you've been avoiding. It's setting one boundary you've been afraid to set. It's removing one obligation that is quietly draining you. It's rebuilding one daily practice that stabilizes you. It's choosing one action that respects your values. When you do that consistently, you start trusting yourself. And when you trust yourself, you don't need to control everything. Because even if life changes, you know you can meet it. That's what it means to let God guide you without becoming passive. You still act, you still build, but you act from inner alignment, not from fear. You move from trust, not from compulsion. So here's the question to hold before the final point. Where in your life are you trying to control everything, and what honest alignment move would give you peace even without guarantees? 12. Peace as the final proof of divine guidance. There's a kind of peace that is just comfort. You solved a problem, you got what you wanted, you avoided a difficult feeling, and for a moment, the pressure leaves. That peace is temporary. It depends on conditions. But there's another kind of peace that doesn't depend on conditions. It can exist even when life is uncertain, even when you're still rebuilding, even when you don't have all the answers. Jung would recognize that kind of peace immediately because it usually shows up when you stop forcing and start aligning. That's why peace can be the final proof of guidance, not because everything outside becomes perfect, but because the war inside ends. When people say, let God guide you, they often imagine guidance as a clear sign, a miraculous opening, a perfect path with no friction. But in real life, guidance is often quiet. It's internal. It's the feeling that you're finally moving in a way that doesn't betray you, that you're finally cooperating with your own deeper truth, that you're no longer trying to control the timeline out of fear. Peace is what happens when you stop arguing with reality and stop lying to yourself. Jung believed that the psyche seeks wholeness, so when you choose what is true, when you stop forcing what's expired, when you stop performing a life that doesn't fit, when you stop chasing outcomes as a substitute for inner stability, something inside you relaxes. Not because life becomes easy, but because you're finally living in integrity. And integrity has a calmness to it. It's almost like your nervous system knows when you're aligned. You can feel it in the body. Breathing becomes deeper. Sleep becomes a little easier. You stop needing constant stimulation. You stop needing constant reassurance. You stop scanning for danger in every conversation. You still have emotions, but they don't run the whole show. You become steadier. That steadiness is a form of guidance. Because a lot of what people call intuition is simply the body reacting to truth before the mind catches up. When you're forcing, your body tightens. When you're aligned, your body opens. You can still be nervous. Nervousness doesn't mean it's wrong, but beneath the nerves there's a quiet yes, a sense of clean direction. Jung would say that when you're in the wrong place psychologically, you pay an internal tax. Everything costs more energy than it should. Your willpower gets drained faster. You crave escapes. You become irritable. You start needing control because you don't feel safe. But when you're guided, when you're aligned, the internal tax decreases. You still work hard, but it feels less violent. You still face challenges, but you feel more grounded inside them. You still have uncertainty, but you're not suffocating in it. That's peace. And peace in this sense is not laziness. It's not, I gave up. It's, I stopped fighting what I cannot control, and I started listening to what I can. This is why people can have everything and still feel no peace, because their life is built on forcing the image, forcing the timeline, forcing the relationship, forcing success, forcing control. They might look powerful, but inside they're tense. And it's why someone can be in a rebuilding season, less money, fewer certainties, a smaller life outwardly, and yet feel more peace than ever, because they're finally honest, they're finally aligned, they're finally walking their own path, not a borrowed one. So how do you use peace as a compass without fooling yourself? You don't chase comfort, you chase clarity. Comfort says, avoid the hard thing. Peace says, do the true thing. Comfort says, stay where it's familiar. Peace says, move where it's honest. Comfort says, control everything so you don't feel fear. Peace says, accept the fear and still walk in the right direction. Peace often shows up after a difficult decision, not before it. After you set a boundary, after you tell the truth, after you let something fall away, after you stop forcing. That's why it's such a powerful proof. It's like your inner world says, finally. And in spiritual terms, that finally is guidance. It's the sense that you are no longer fighting the way your life needs to unfold. You're cooperating with it. So here's a simple practice to end this entire episode in a grounded way. Today, when you face a choice, don't only ask, what do I want? Ask, what choice leads to peace tomorrow? Not comfort tonight. Peace tomorrow. The kind of peace that comes from self-respect, alignment, and truth. Because peace is not an emotion you chase. It's a consequence of living honestly. And here's the final question to sit with, quietly. If God is guiding you through peace, what part of your life would become calmer the moment you stopped forcing it? If you take a step back and look at the whole journey we just walked through, the pattern is almost painfully clear. Forcing is rarely love. Forcing is usually fear. Fear of uncertainty, fear of silence, fear of losing control, fear of not being enough. And the tragedy is that fear can keep you moving for years, while slowly draining the very life you're trying to build. Jung's gift is that he doesn't shame you for that. He simply shows you what's happening. He shows you that when you're constantly acting, you might be escaping yourself. When you're constantly forcing, you might be trying to control what can't be controlled. When motivation disappears, when symptoms show up, when burnout hits, when collapse arrives, it might not be life punishing you. It might be life guiding you. It might be the deeper self, the unconscious, the soul, whatever name you feel closest to, trying to bring you back to truth. Because the soul doesn't thrive in a life built on performance. It thrives in a life built on alignment. And that's the quiet meaning behind let God guide you. It's not about waiting for a miracle. It's about stopping the inner war. It's about letting expired structures fall. It's about respecting timing. It's about taking synchronicity seriously without becoming superstitious. It's about shifting from compulsive control to honest inner alignment. And in the end, it's about peace. Not the peace of comfort, but the peace that arrives when you stop betraying yourself. So don't turn this into a dramatic promise. Turn it into a small experiment. Just for the next day, notice where you force. Notice where your body tightens, where your mind rushes, where your emotions get desperate, and instead of pushing harder, do something braver. Pause. Breathe. Ask what fear is underneath. Then choose one calm action that aligns you with truth. Not the perfect action, the true one, 1% today. Pick one thing you've been forcing and release it just enough to listen. Not forever. Just enough to hear what your inner life has been trying to say. Because the most powerful change doesn't happen when you finally control life. It happens when you finally stop fighting it.